Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, from January 1st this year, under a new law, large French companies are supposed to have women making up 40% of their board members. But how many have actually succeeded? Also, the push for equality at the World Economic Forum. We talked to KPMG's Melanie, who's been leading the campaign to change the status quo in Britain's boardrooms. And finally, we meet the all-female Afghan orchestra, who's hitting a high note. But we begin in France, which from the start of this year, boards of large companies by law must now have women accounting for at least 40% of their members. However, despite having 6 years to prepare for this, only 60% have reached their target. Brian Quinn takes a look as to why.
118 large companies across the spectrum of French business, many still not meeting their gender quotas. BIC, for example, 30% women on the board of directors. Municipal contracting specialist JC Decaux, 25%. Carrefour, just 23%. The law was enacted in 2011, so 6 years later, why can't businesses keep up? For this office, tasked with recruiting future female executives, lackluster profiles aren't the problem.
Every time we've looked to recruit a female director with a particular profile, we've found her.
So where is the problem? At biopharma company GenFit, 20% of the supervisory board are women. According to the boss, it takes time to change attitudes.
It's not easy in this field. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's not easy. Unfortunately, I think the pharmaceutical industry is perhaps traditionally a bit macho.
For others, changing ideas comes step by step. This Marseille business counts 2 women among its 7 board members.
As soon as new positions come available, we propose nominations. Obviously, we cannot ask a male board member who's doing his job perfectly fine to leave.
All these businesses have until the next General Assembly to achieve compliance, and all say they will. Despite the stragglers, the law has resulted in progress. In 2014, only 8% of large businesses had 40% women on their boards. Now, that figure is more than half.
And it's not just the French government that's working to correct gender imbalance. In boardrooms, high up in the Swiss Alps at the World Economic Forum this January, only 1 out of 5 people attending is a woman. Now, 6 years ago, the non-profit introduced its very own gender quota, requesting strategic partners bring to Davos at least 1 woman for every 5 senior executives attending. But is this actually working? Joining me now from Davos is Melanie, the UK Vice Chair of KPMG and founding member of the 30% Club that aims to achieve a minimum of 30% women on FTSE 100 boards. Melanie, thank you so much for being with us. When you stand there in the midst of Davos and you hear and see that only 21% of the 3,000 official participants attending are women, it doesn't seem that the World Economic Forum's gender quota is actually working.
Well, I think there's certainly been progress in the sense that I think the introduction of the quota and 1 in 5 has worked to an extent, but there's no doubt that with 50% of the world population being women, there's a long way to go.
So, Melanie, what are the benefits of having more women at events such as Davos, not to mention having more women in the boardroom?
Well, I think the theme of Davos this year is responsible business. And I don't know how you can have responsible business without including everyone in that conversation. And certainly my experience of sitting around board tables is the more diverse a group of people that you have nutting out difficult issues, the more imaginative and innovative you'll be. And so when I look around Davos at the moment, clearly, partly it reflects leadership in business and so forth at the moment. And that's why we're at 20% here. But we have to move that dial if we're going to include everybody in the conversation.
Is it disappointing for you that, that it's only reached 20 or so percent?
Of course, I'm disappointed, but I also think that, and the approach that we're taking in the UK has been much more about getting buy-in from men, particularly to the topic. And I think forcing things through doesn't always have the desired effect. So yes, there's more work to do, and we certainly have to change what's going on. But I don't think the answer is creating necessarily a quota.
And I want to talk to you about that because, as you pointed out, there is a difference between France and the UK because the UK has not gone down the road of quotas, instead relying on voluntary business-led approach. How do you make that an effective policy? What do you do to convince companies that this is the way to go forward?
I think in the world today, what really defines getting problems solved is more effective collaboration. And there's no doubt that the results we've seen in the UK have been the result of collaboration, not just between female business leaders, but male business leaders, the executive search firms, and indeed our own government, who elected not to push for a quota, but to set targets. And I think it was us and them being mindful of the fact that this isn't just about hitting numbers, it's about changing culture. And so over the last 5-6 years, I've seen the zeitgeist shift absolutely and materially in the direction of understanding why having women in the boardroom creates better boards. And there's lots of statistical evidence that suggests that there is better financial performance from businesses that have diverse boardrooms. But I like to focus on the more effective conversations that are taking place, and as I said previously, much more imaginative discussions. So the real push has been to create cultural change as well as hit a number, and I think that is why we have been so successful.
Do you think company leaders these days truly understand that effectively diversity does mean business?
I think there are businesses at very different stages in their sort of evolution around this subject. And at one end, there are companies that absolutely understand that inclusion is at the heart of successful business, and they don't see it as optional. And right at the other end of the spectrum, there are companies that are now just only waking up to the need for them to create environments in which everybody can thrive. But there are a lot of people doing a lot of work around the topic now, and I think that actually it's almost like climate change or indeed the environment. If you look at some of the work that was done 15, 20 years ago, and some of it was through legislation, the environment has now it's not optional for us not to be aware of what we're doing to our environment. And you've seen companies have to adopt policies to make a difference. And I see this agenda somewhat on the same journey, where actually it's going to be unfashionable to be not inside the conversation and to be not taking action.
Do you think, Melanie, that we need to toughen up our approach when it comes to gender equality in the corporate world?
Well, I would say this because I'm involved in a voluntary business-led approach, which is target-based, not quota-based. And I can see the pros and cons of both those approaches. But in truth, this isn't just about hitting numbers, as I said. It is about changing micro-behaviours inside organisations and the experience that women and others with protected characteristics have inside those organisations. So I don't think it's as simple as getting tough because you don't affect cultural change unless people believe deeply that something needs to change, and more importantly, that they believe deeply they need to change their own behaviours.
Melanie Richards, I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, no problem. Thank you.
Now, also at Davos this year was Afghanistan's first all-female orchestra. The group of 35 young musicians, some orphans or from poor families, performed in front of world leaders. An extraordinary achievement for a group of young women who faced death threats back home for daring to play their instruments in public.
Risking their lives to practice their passion, Zora is Afghanistan's only all-female orchestra. They are led by the country's first female conductor, 19-year-old Nagina Kapalwak. Her family moved to Kabul to support her music career, but not all were on board with her decision.
They didn't let me to come in the music school. My uncles make a lot of problem for me. Like my grandmother said to my father that if you let Nigin to go to music school, so after that you are not my son anymore.
While music is still frowned upon in Afghanistan's tightly gender-segregated conservative society, the studio provides a safe haven from the death threats and discrimination these girls have had to overcome. Zora was founded by Dr. Ahmed Sarmast, who himself has been a victim of the Taliban's aggression. He was injured in a deadly attack 3 years ago, but he hopes the initiative will show the world a different side of his war-ravaged country.
Afghanistan is closely associated outside Afghanistan with Kalashnikov, Bukra, but it's not all about Afghanistan. Every member of the Afghan society is not violating the human rights of the women of Afghanistan.
Some of Zora's musicians were once street workers. Among them is 18-year-old violinist Zarifa Adiba, who has already performed at Carnegie Hall in New York.
I'm so happy that the generation, my generation, they are trying to get education, they are trying to do something better for our country. So that's why I think we are going to change, but it's hard.
These girls hope their lasting legacy will be to challenge the world's perception of their country. And where words fail, they hope the music will speak for itself.
And that's it for now. And if you'd like to comment on what you've just seen, you can head to our Facebook page, that's France24, _51%, or do send us a tweet at _51%. Thanks for your feedback so far, and please do keep those comments coming in. So until our next show, bye for now.